Starting now. All right. Good morning. This is MED110, Anatomy and Physiology. I am your host, Dr. Garias, and this is now week 2. So, what is due today? Your task 1, your discussion 1, and your case study in lesson 1. And the task 1 was simply to get um, the lab, um, what do you call that? The lab form, which is really important now because in week 6 or 7, you cannot attend the laboratory if you do not sign the lab safety contract. And by the way, there's probably going to be a enhanced lab safety contract due to COVID. But right now, we're just getting confirmation regarding the schedule. And once they approve my schedule, I just put it in last night, then I could share the dates with everybody. Now, if you can't make it to any of the sessions, that's okay. Give me a call because, like I said, I don't get paid by the hour. Like if there is another time that you could come in, yeah, I'll be on campus. And because there are a lot of people, but there shouldn't be more than like 5 people in the room. Um, uh, and especially, I believe this class, I don't, this particular class, let me check how many people. There shouldn't be that many people per class, no more than like 9. And not everyone's going to show up on the same day. But it'll be done on like a sign up basis. So there'll be multiple opportunities starting at week 6 and week 7 all the way to week 10. But do know and understand that the laboratory portion of this class is mandatory. All right. So let's review. If you go into announcements, you'll see I put some older notes right here. Quick thing. If you saw this, if you're a frontliner, please read this and shoot me an email because we're trying to promote all of our people who work in the front lines. And according to our latest data from term 1 of this year, almost 82% of our health science students already work in the field. Right. So please, just so you can be represented, read this. And there's some quick requirements that we have, and also permission to use your likeness on our website, because we, of course, just like everybody else, we want to give props to where it's due to the people who, but everyone in healthcare knows we've been endangering ourselves mentally, physically, emotionally, and that's the reason why we love what we love. So let's look at these old overview notes that I had. I was looking at notes this morning, and I was looking at these notes from several terms ago, and I talked to you about some of these things. We had an inquiry yesterday, like, how do I study? How do I memorize things? Well, I actually in the past wrote it down. So I put it in these notes. And we also talked about anatomy and physiology, the definition of it, and pathology is just messing with the normal. And the AL is pertaining to, norm is the rule. So the rule is anatomy and physiology. The parts should be all there, and the parts should all work together. But what if the parts and the way they work don't match or don't function? Well, then it's a pathology. And the people who are usually in the basement of the hospital, that's the Department of Pathology. They are also experts at cytology and histology, which was the topic of last week. And I just had some other notes here because I may have mentioned some of them, so that in future anatomy and physiology and pathology classes, you'll understand, like the reason, like, why do they call it gross? They call it gross anatomy because it's macroscopic. It's things you see with your eye. And of course, pathology, those are things that you don't see. Histology and cytology, which we introduced you to last week. Now, back to the rationale, because today we're going to be talking about, today and next week, we'll be talking about all these other things. And the question that I usually get is that, oh, why are we studying this? I thought we were studying anatomy and physiology, you know, the parts at this level. But when you look at it, the levels of organization of a human being, they start off at the smallest. This is atoms and molecules and macromolecules, which we'll be talking about this week. Organelles, which we will be talking about next week. And we kind of talked a little bit about cells and tissues last week. So you could see if something's wrong with all of this, it's going to be something wrong with your organ. It's going to be something wrong with the organ systems. And then, of course, there's going to be something wrong with the whole entire individual. Okay. And this is just the anatomic and physiologic issues of our patient. You'll learn in your clinical classes that you have to look at the patient holistically, right? For example, what's going on in their head? Are they worried about the bill? Do they have family issues or mental issues on top of their physical issues? Are their physical issues causing these problems? There's a lot to consider when you're dealing with your patient, and this is a nice way to look at a human being from its smallest parts to its largest parts. And by the time the human being has signs and symptoms, it's already at this stage, organ systems and organism. We want to get to it earlier than that. So understanding atoms, molecules, macromolecules, organelles, which are the anatomy of a cell, which is another nice word for cytology. We're going to talk about that next week. Okay. So here's some other stuff, and it's just overview, the rest of the notes. So let's jump right in on what we are to do this week and what's due for next week. And I also have supplementary notes and diagrams. So let's look at, because that's always the good thing to do, because there are some students, you just jump right in. You tackle the discussion, then you forget the task, or tackle the task and then forget the lesson. So let's look at, I always start from left to right, top to bottom. I always start with the task, then I do the discussion, then I'll do the lesson. So let's start with the task. Chemical basis of life, you watch the videos, but within the videos, you see here, right? I need to know chemical bonds, reactions, compounds, and the difference between inorganic and organic compounds, elements, and atoms. When you're creating, which is the task right here, when you're creating your concept map, you have to hit all these points, right? So what will we be hitting? Basic chemical structures, which were the elements, what are atoms, chemical bonds, chemical reactions, inorganic compounds, organic compounds, right? And also you see the chemistry of water was mentioned twice. Organic molecules were mentioned twice. So it's like already screaming to you like, oh, these are my objectives. So those are your main points on your concept map. And again, if you're not quite sure on how to do a concept map, give me a call. And I think I have a video somewhere. And if I don't, I'll make one. That's my new thing now. I make videos incessantly. But you could use Microsoft Word, or even if you don't, if you don't have access to any of that, how's this? Get a piece of typewriter paper or a blank piece of paper, draw it out physically with a paper and pen and a ruler. Just make it nice and neat and take a picture of it. It's the same thing, as long as I understand that you know how these concepts are all related. So right now, you already now know your goals, and right here, if you click on this, there's some nice notes. You could look through that, right? And we'll be looking through that momentarily, right? You can see all these nice notes, right? Every time you see the Carolina, you don't do the labs, but there are always notes on it. And here's another ebook guide for proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, and I'm going to go over that in a moment as well. But that's actually how you navigate through not only textbooks, but through this Moodle course shell. Okay, so let's go through some of my notes, because it summarizes these, especially if you haven't seen them yet. So let's look at some of my notes, and I go here, and I go in my announcements and the notes, and I have some notes right here. All right. So remember the diagram we just saw just a minute ago? We have to look at what makes you, you. So your atoms, ions, and molecules, the element is the simplest form of matter, and that's oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium. You know, the stuff you, even if you didn't have, maybe you had some earth science, or maybe you had some chemistry in high school. These are just like the basic things that make up the earth and make up, reality. Now, human beings got a lot of carbon. If you've ever watched sci-fi movies, they always call us carbon-based molecules, is essentially what we are. Now, if you look at a typical element, and let's also open, let me minimize this, and then let's also open, I should have put it all together, but silly me, I didn't. How do we go back? Let's look at the week 2 diagrams, and I'm going to put them back to back. And if you have a large enough screen, you could do this, put them back to back. But let's look at this first. So we look at a typical, we'll look at a typical, and we look at the notes, elements, right? Which is the basic thing of what we are. So in a typical element, if you look in the middle of it, also called its nucleus, sometimes they call it the core, you have protons, and that's in pink, and neutrons, and if you see, the protons have a little plus and the neutrons have a little zero. So these are particles, and the proton is a positively charged particle, the neutron is a negatively charged particle, and the electron here on these outside rings colored in this little aqua color, those are negatively charged. And then it goes, if everything's in balance, all the protons and the electrons should match each other and therefore equal out. And that's something you'll see in nature and in anatomy and physiology, how things balance each other and how things balance each other out. And if there's anything wrong with the energy, and it works just like a magnet, if you recall, like magnets have a plus and a minus. And guess what? Human beings are also have charges, right? So if you ever watch The Matrix and they talk about human beings being essentially a battery, well, don't we have positive parts and negative parts? And they're in balance. So when they're in balance, everything gets to be stable. And this balance, this also, another term for it is homeostasis, right? Stasis means to stand in one place. Homeo means the same. So you want to have the sameness all throughout. And in this, they match each other. So the energy levels are in balance, just like a magnet, just like a battery. And it requires energy to keep all of this. And the second you're not eating or providing energy, what happens to the system? It falls apart. Because it goes, in order for something to stay together, it requires, or to glue together, it requires energy, which gets us to the next part in a minute, which is, we're going to be talking about bonds in a minute, on how you actually stick together. When I was a kid, every time I used to go swimming, I used to wonder why, if I threw my cupcake in a pool, it'll eventually start falling apart. But why, when I jump in the pool, why I don't fall apart? Because I have these connections and these bonds and this energy that keeps me together. Now, part of that energy, sometimes the energy is a little bit more towards the positive side, and sometimes that energy is a little bit more towards the negative side. And those are ions. Those are charged particles. Those are things with, let's say, for example, I have more protons than electrons, like for the example, sodium. That means I'm going to have an extra plus, right, in my charge. And if you put pure sodium in water, it'll explode because it's highly it's highly reactive. So when you see a plus or a minus, that means it's going to react. And we have chemical reactions are based on these pluses and minuses. And they have to, in the end, balance each other out. And these reactions require energy. So you have cations and anions. And maybe you might notice these because these are the things that we put in IV bags to balance you out. Sodium, potassium, magnesium, magnesium chloride, sodium bicarb. Sound familiar? If you watch, if you've ever watched, like, ER movies or whatnot. So
Grey's Anatomy.
yeah, that kind of thing. So they like, oh, I need a sodium bicarb push stat. Now you know why, because the pluses and minuses in my patient is out of balance. So I have to push this fluid to make them in balance. And we're going to talk about pH momentarily. But you now see where that's why I love when nurses and other medical professionals say things like, oh, I hate math, or I can't understand chemistry or biochemistry. Well, you're in the wrong business because that's all we do all day, right? Every time we give you medications, it's to bring you where? Back to balance, right? It's not, the laypersons think it's to fix you. No, it isn't. The human being is highly complex, which now you could see. So we're going to look at the types of bonds. And I have, let's see, we have that other pick that I have. I can move this out of the way, and then this. Now the bonds are interactions between these energies, okay? And here are from the strongest, which are up here, and then the weakest are more towards the bottom of this list. So let's go over each one. So, and I have this, and this is from the older version of a textbook that the university used to have, so I copied and pasted over here. The ionic bond, it's attractions between the pluses, which is cations, and the minuses, which is anions, right? They're easily disrupted in water because you put, like, for example, a really good example of an ionic bond is salt. Salt, if you recall, is sodium chloride. But if the second I put it in water, what happens? The sodium gets separated from the chloride, and then that's why you don't see it anymore, because it's no longer a sodium chloride crystal. It's now separated into sodium and chloride. It didn't disappear. When you drink the water, you sure as heck taste it, but it got dissolved because the anion and cation, we know that what? They are, they're highly reactive. And if you put it in water, you'll get something interesting. But if you have pure sodium powder and you put it in water, look it up on YouTube. It'll explode because it's very, very highly reactive. Now, what's a covalent bond? It's the sharing of one or more pairs of electrons. Like, let's say, for example, right? Like, for example, a chloride ion. So if you had, a chloride atom and another chloride atom, they would share, this is called the valence electron, which is the last shell or energy level of electrons. Sometimes there's an interaction where they share that valence, and that's called a covalent bond. You could have a single one, or you could have double ones, okay? And maybe you've seen them. The single one would be like one line in between two letters, which is carbon, right? Or I could have two lines in between two C's, and that'll be a double bond or double covalent bond. The next one is nonpolar covalent and polar covalent. Covalent means sharing your valence electron, or the last electron shell of energy shell. Now, nonpolar means they share equally. Polar means one side will be a little bit more sharing than the other. So it's an uneven sharing, right? So nonpolar covalent is stronger because they're both sharing. Both are holding on tight. But a polar covalent, one is holding on tighter than the other. So it can be broken a little bit easier. Another bond what we'll be talking about in the weeks to come is hydrogen bond. Hydrogen bond, oh, well, actually, we'll be talking about it momentarily. It's the bonds that are formed between two hydrogens. And they're very weak and they can be bent very easily. And they're also not only present in water, they're present on something very, very important, which is DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, which is the blueprint of who you are. And that blueprint has to be folded and compacted. So it's good that it has a lot of hydrogen bonds, so we can, you know, fold it and compact it into a very, very tight space. And that's a lot of information, and it'll fold and coil. And it's really important that we have this hydrogen bond. So not all bonds have to be super strong. Some of them, like hydrogen bonds, have to be very very loose, and it gives the chemicals the ability to fold and coil. And we'll be talking about that in week 3. Now, van der Waals forces, they're the weakest. There's a brief attraction disturbance. It's the weakest of all bonds. It's not important to you guys right now, but all these other bonds are very important clinically, especially when you start getting into pharmacology and how, and also now you know exactly why you don't jump when you jump into a pool, or you know, you don't melt. I don't know, I used to watch those Bugs Bunny, you know, with Marvin the Martian.
Yeah.
And I was like, how does that work? How, like, is there such thing as a ray that can totally disintegrate me? In theory, yes, you can make one if you understand how ionic bonds, covalent bond, all these work. Actually, military is working on something using sound, right? Not only to disrupt, you know, hearing and disrupt your brain, to disrupt the hydrogen bonds in the water in your body. Human beings are made out of 66% water. You can only imagine if a strong enough sound wave disrupts the hydrogen bonds. No matter how much body armor you're wearing, or even if you're in a tank, you could get hurt. And it's very interesting how science kind of perverts and weaponizes things. It never ceases to amaze me, especially being a former chemist. A lot of the jobs that I was applying to when I was in graduate school were for like Department of Defense, and a lot of things were about destroying and killing things, which was kind of odd to me. But I before medical school, I got into protein chemistry, which is the basis of what's going on right now, and of biology and all these other things, which is really neat. Now, here's some examples. Like there could be covalent bond, like carbon dioxide. See how there's double bonds here, but sometimes there are, most of the time, that carbon will match to another carbon with only a single bond, and sometimes there's even triple bonds. Okay. Don't worry about these pages in your text. They're from an old text, so kindly ignore those. Now, let's look at, oh, we'll look at water in a moment. So let me minimize that. It's so many pictures. And let's see if I have other, oh, that's pH. We'll talk about that in a moment. All right, so let's look at where we're at with what, like, because every once in a while we have to check on, hey, are we learning what we're supposed to be learning? So let's look at our task 2 and let's see our checklist on what we have done so far. So right now, and also watch these videos because they do the same thing that I'm doing right now. Did we talk about chemical bonds? Yes. Chemical reactions, not so much yet, right? Chemistry of water, that's coming up. Inorganic compounds and organic compounds. So let's talk about that. And if you look here, there's notes here, which I like. Now, here, down here, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, those are your organic compounds. Meaning to say is these things are in living things. Inorganic compounds are things that are in nature, like sodium and chloride. And inorganic compounds are things that are comprised of carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, and a little bit of nitrogen in the case of proteins. So let's go over a little bit here about a little bit inorganic chemistry. Ooh, why are you not playing nice with me? All right, so we'll rely on my notes. So let's go with my notes. Maybe that's why I also made notes in the past. All righty. Let's jump to this. Maybe they have a comparison. That's a little bit more important. So inorganic compounds, this is how I think of it. Things that you find in the dirt, like magnesium, salts, right? Things that aren't living, okay? But we're in the business of living. And let's look at these Carolina notes. Now, and this is also going to get into a little bit of chemistry and how chemical reactions work. Didn't you ever wonder, how now you know that you require energy, and this energy keeps all these bonds together so you don't fall apart. And the second you die, you're no longer eating, right? So
Yeah.
you should start falling apart the second you are deceased. And that's how, if you ever watch those pathology shows like NCIS and stuff like that, we can figure out through the chemistry of your body almost to the hour when you died and how you died. And
So
that's
when I don't mean to interrupt. So when you're talking about when the body is deceased and we're, not to sound graphic, but when we're decomposing, that's really our anatomical structure kind
that's
of
really a reverse reaction. Like
okay.
the forward reaction is keeping you all in one place. The reverse
Okay.
reaction is to decompose you. And look at the word decompose. You
Right.
are
Okay.
doing what? Reversing the composition. Because right now, this should boggle your mind. Right now, because you ate breakfast, right? You get to live.
Mm-hmm.
I take away the breakfast,
Mm-hmm.
you will start to decompose. You'll start to
Mm-hmm.
fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And that's why it goes nutrition and what the intake of my patient is very important, and also the outtake, what's going out of my patient is equally important, because if what's coming out of my patient is more than what I'm intaking, then that's a problem. And that's also it. Weight loss is not rocket science. Once you have the basics of how your body works, and when you get into the chapter regarding gastrointestinal, and also the chapter regarding hormones, you can now see why your diets don't work and why it's actually against science and why you gain weight. So anatomy and physiology and your future pathology classes, it has a lot of context, and you get to know more than the layperson knows, and it's kind of neat. So one of the things that most laypersons don't know is you have every chemical reaction starts off with reactants and ends up with products. And in order for the reaction to go, it needs to get over this hump. This hump right here is called activation energy. This big thing right here. Now, the best analogy is this. If you take like a burger and just put it out, you put it out, on the table, it would take years for it to decompose, wouldn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Especially if it's McDonald's.
I was about to say, especially if it's McDonald's.
McDonald's, there's people who have 10-year-old fries that show no signs or symptoms of decay because of what's in it. And
Oh,
but it sure tastes good though. But when I look at it, after I eat McDonald's, I'm like, oh, this is not gonna sit well. But
no.
we're all suckers, right, for taste. But it would take forever and a day for the reaction to go from the reactants, which is the air and the water and all the pieces of the burger and whatnot, for it to become what? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, right? And nitrogen.
Yeah.
It will take forever. So in our body, we have these things called enzymes, because enzymes catalyze chemical reactions, and a catalyst is something that makes things go faster. So what does that mean? So if I have an enzyme, let's say the reactants, and let's talk about enzyme for carbohydrates, which is amylase, right? And you'll notice enzymes have the suffix ase at the end of it. So amylase, you take a carbohydrate, which is made out of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, right? Those are the reactants, right? Now, if I didn't have any amylase, it would take forever and a day to climb this mountain right here. But since I have amylase, it goes much quicker here, right? And that's called activation energy. And that's what enzymes do. And that's how the reaction will go this way, from reactants to products. And I make the analogy, like, think of it like riding your bike. This first hill is too much. It would take me forever to ride my bike. And then once I get to the top, then everything takes over, right? It's natural, right? Here, it'll be easier for me to ride my bike to the top, and then what? Then
Right
the
all the way down.
what do you call that? The reaction will then happen naturally. So in your body, these reactions would happen naturally, but we have enzymes to kind of push it along and kind of make it a little quicker. And also, right, you're hungry in the morning, right? So do you have a lot of reactants in your body?
No.
Nope. Right? And the ultimate product is always oxygen and glucose, the two things that your body loves. And that's also the other thing that me and the former nutritionist at Stratford, Dr. Chin, when she was here, she always used to tell me, like, why do Americans eat so much? Right? She's originally from China, but she did postdoctoral work here. And to this day, she looks at Americans like, why do you guys eat like 10 times more than you ever would want?
Or should.
And I was like, it's tasty. And I was on a strict diet at the time because I was diagnosed with pre-diabetes, and I was complaining that I had to eat around 2,000 calories per day. And if you want to know what 2,000 calories look like, it looks like half a Big Mac around there.
Oh no.
I could eat 2 of those, right?
Oh.
They'll be like, I can have room, right? Oh, don't forget the fries and the large Coke. And she was like, she and another doctor was convincing me, like, you should eat more than around 1,200, right? Because I have way too many reactants, and it's going to make way too many products. And remember, it goes, if your body has too much product, what will it do? It'll store it, and it will store it in the form of fat, right? That's all that fat is extra glucose. So if you eat less, there will be less energy required to make the product of oxygen and glucose. And the glucose won't go into fat. And it makes sense, right? But it's really, really hard, especially around, like, I eat breakfast around 7, a nice dry toast. And, sometimes I have my oatmeal, right, to get down the cholesterol, which, by the way, is, if you just put up with oatmeal every day, like 5 days out of 7, you don't need any meds. It'll drop your cholesterol to nothing. And my cholesterol, even though I'm pre-diabetic, I have mild hypertension, my cholesterol is nothing because I'm constantly eating oatmeal, and oatmeal takes these reactants and drives the products out. And we'll show you that at another time. But
Kind of like a detox.
Yeah, this is what it actually does. The oatmeal is non-digestible plant material, right? It's the reason why your doctor always tells you eat more greens, right? Eat more rabbit food, right? Because that cellulose is non-digestible. So if you eat, it's like, you eat corn, what ends up in the toilet? Corn. But the thing that you don't see is that the corn grabbed a whole bunch of fat on its way down.
Oh.
That kale grabbed a whole bunch of fat and cholesterol on its way out. And that's why kale's so good. The greens are so good. And also they deposit some of these minerals in your body that help you as well, that also help these reactants go to products. So carbohydrates, an example of an enzyme for a carbohydrate is amylase. Protein, of course, it's a proteinase. And for fats, it's a lipase.
So I don't mean to interrupt again, but just a question. So when a lot of dietitians, or, some things, of course, when you're dieting, you're going to read all this stuff on the internet, and they're going to tell you, like, all the different parts of the alphabet will work. When they say you can try to eat under your, say like my goal for the day would be like 1,500 calories or whatever. If they say that you can have calories, like try to stay under that for the day and you start losing weight, because that's what happened to me. Like last summer, I lost 20 pounds in 2 months by eating under my calorie count and exercising. How does that go with all that and not having to store all that fat?
Because now what are you doing? Now
Mm-hmm.
you're eating up more energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Goes all that glucose that would normally get stored up
Mm-hmm.
would get used. So
Okay.
the fat cells will then
Mm-hmm.
shrink because
Okay.
there's glucose in it. The fat
Okay.
cells get nice and big and chunky when
Mm-hmm.
you have extra glucose, when you have a sedentary lifestyle and you
Mm-hmm.
have an intake. Like one of the exercises that my dietitian did, she pretty much said, okay, for a week, don't diet, but I want you to write down, there's this app that she gave me, write down everything you eat and you'll see what I'm talking about. In 1 week, I was averaging almost 7,000 calories a day because of garbage. You know, you go to meetings
Yeah.
and you have Danish, and then when you start logging everything down, it starts becoming horrific. You're like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, I ate what? One day I ate 10,000 calories because I had 2 lunches and then I had a dinner with friends. And then I looked at the calorie count at night and I was feeling very, very sluggish and kind of sick.
Low.
And it was
Mm-hmm.
close to 10,000 calories. And that's in
Wow.
one day. I'm only 5'4". I'm not supposed to be 220, 230 pounds. I am not
Mm-hmm.
because because
So
I
it kind of overwhelmed your
160,
system.
170, and even 160, 170 is kind of heavy uh,
Mm-hmm.
for a guy my size. But it shocked me to think, oh my God. And also, what's my lifestyle? I'm in front of a computer all day. I'm a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm
Mm-hmm.
not a teacher, I'm an administrator, so I'm doing administrative things which require me to be on the phone or be on the computer. That's why you're not looking at me right now. I actually have my computer on a stand, and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of stand and walk around a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I try not to sit. I used to get these pains in my neck and my back because one time, me and one of the nursing professors, we were working on a project. We sat at our desk for 11 hours
Wow.
straight. But when you look at the ward, it's the same thing. You get up, you go do something, and it's only like 10 feet away, but then you're back
Mm-hmm.
at the nurse's station sitting. And then
Yeah.
you put in the computer, then you get up and you do something, and you go sit down. If you look at your step count, it's nothing at the end
Yeah.
of the day. But you've seen hundreds of patients, but you didn't go anywhere. You didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
You were sitting, and and you could see how that works, how the products, if I decrease my reactants, I'll have less products. If I increase the energy expenditure, I will have less products. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
products is that excess glucose, right? I mean, excess glucose, right? Excess sugar, and then it'll end up in fats. Another analogy that I always make it is, when you gas up your car, do you put more than what your car requires?
No.
Right? And that's what diabetes is. Diabetes is that extra sugar. Like, it's like, for example, let's say I have 20 gallons in my car, right? I filled it up 20 gallons, right? But I'm not done. I take the rest of the gasoline and start pouring it over my seats, over the engine, over the hood of the car. Don't you think now that fuel is now dangerous to me?
Yes.
Yes, just like glucose. Glucose, if it's inside the cell, it can be utilized for energy. But if it's outside the cell floating around, glucose
Mm-hmm.
is a 6 carbon molecule. It's very big and it does
Mm-hmm.
a lot of damage. It's like a bull in a china shop. And that's
Wow.
why diabetes is one of those, what I call all of the above pathologies, because all of the above will happen to you, right? My patient always asks, well, will it affect my hair? Yes. Skin? Yes. Eyes? Yes. But what I love getting to especially my male patients, it's going to affect your junk. They don't listen to me until you tell them they're going to get erectile dysfunction.
Whoa.
Yeah, my patients, they don't care about hypertension, stroke. Male patients, they don't care about that, right? Until you tell them, oh, by the way, your stuff isn't going to work. And then a month or two later, hey, doc, remember that thing you were telling me about? And then you're like, it didn't happen to me, but it gives me some concerns. What does that mean? It happened. And now he is concerned. Oh, he said
No,
he's
I don't
concerned.
care about a heart attack. Just don't let it
Yeah,
affect
he
me
doesn't
another.
care about the dizzy spells or he can't feel his fingers or the chest pain. Yeah, but the second his stuff doesn't work, oh, he'll get to you real quick.
He's like, yo, what's wrong? I don't care about everything else. Just let me know what's wrong down there.
I just find it funny how a lot of my like when I was practicing, a lot of my patients have like they don't tell you exactly what's wrong, but they get it's like they tell you all these other things that lead to the thing that's wrong. And in your MED110 class, which I'm currently teaching, we're going to teach you how when your patient's beating around the bush, how to get them to to commit to what's the problem. Now, all of this stuff, these enzymes, remember I told you amylase is for carbohydrates, proteinase is for proteins, and lipase is for fats, for breaking down
Mhm,
fats, and or for making it go through a reaction. Well, all the substrate is the fat, carbohydrate, or protein, and the enzyme is the ASE, right? So I have
mhm,
a substrate, fat or lipid, and the enzyme is lipase. And it is a lock and key. You will see this model prominent not only in pharmacology, but in hormones and everything. Um, Chemically, there is a lock and key fit to things. And this is also how insulin works. And we'll be talking about how insulin gets, remember I talked about how glucose has to be inside the cell, okay?
mhm,
Now, you'll see this word coenzymes or cofactors.
mhm,
Another fancy word for coenzymes is vitamins. So vitamins, if we look back at this, you can't just take vitamins alone. Remember back in those old sci-fi shows where they're in space and they're drinking their Tang and eating their pills?
mhm,
Possible. Astronauts have to eat real food because you need real reactants to get real products. If your
mhm.
body just wanted pills all day, instead of reactants, it should have just said what? Pills. But
Yeah.
real food, so because your body likes carrying out this process. Now, what's a coenzyme or a cofactor, also known as vitamins? They actually help speed this along even quicker. So when you're taking vitamins, you have to take it with food. My more older patients, they're like, oh, I feel anemic, I'm just going to take a multivitamin. If you just take vitamins, guess what you're going to have? The same
Yeah.
problem. If you take a whole bunch of pills, and we proved it in pharmacology in medical school, we had a whole bunch of us. In medical school is really interesting. Every experiment that you do it on each other. It's really messed up, right?
Mm,
But one of the experiments was finding out what the effects of cofactors and coenzymes. And what happened? The people who ate it with food felt better and had better results. But the people, and I was part of the group that only took multivitamins,
mhm,
more than 96, 97% of my multivitamin ended up in my urine. So it wasn't doing anything. All I'm doing is creating what my professor said, oh, lovely, you're creating very expensive and colorful urine, which was the truth, right? Now, do you see this? How they have a substrate and an enzyme? And I told you that's kind of also how insulin works, how hormones work, and also how drugs work, right? So if I have an enzyme that will make let's call it a happiness formula, right? That will kick out dopamine or kick out serotonin, right? What happens if I block it? What happens to my happiness? If I block my happiness, I will
mhm,
become sad. And that's
mhm,
actually the basis for neuropharmacology and psychiatric pharmacology, because
mhm,
it's also the reason why it's highly suggested that you go see your physician when you're feeling depressed. You go see a psychiatrist because they'll not only talk to you, they will give you medication to help you move towards the mood that you need to do this to survive and to function at work. Now,
mhm,
not in my opinion, not all things require meds, and
mhm,
psychiatrists don't just give out pills. There are
mhm,
many times where you need to speak to a psychologist, right? Psychologist is also a doctor, PhD, but they don't give out pills. But they do also what psychiatrists do. They analyze, like for example, my eldest son loved to fight, got into trouble in school all the time, got kicked out of Fairfax County for fighting,
Wow.
faulted a teacher. It was just awful. Now I was thinking, oh, I'm gonna get him on some meds, calm this boy down. But then after coming to group therapy, which I was against, I was like, oh, you don't need to, I was your typical defensive parent. But after a couple of sessions, we realized that without fault finding, part of it was my parenting style.
Mhm.
And also I trained him since he was 6, and I trained him to do things that you really shouldn't train a 6-year-old to do. So was it a surprise at 10 years old his response was violence instead of trying to assess the situation, and then over the
Mhm.
years he got better at it, right? And then he fell back to what he always knows and loves and became a Marine. So, yeah. But
I was about to say maybe you should do some sports to kind of center that energy.
oh my goodness, I had to take him out of when he was in high school. I put him in a men's league. I put him in a Salvadorian men's league on the weekends because he was getting red cards all over the place when he was in high school because he was
Mhm.
just aggressive as hell. And I'm like, and he didn't see it as that. He just saw it as this is how I win. But again, we didn't need medication to modify his behavior. We needed
Mhm.
psychotherapy, right? We needed
Mhm.
talking it out to make him understand that yes, grew up this way, but you don't have to be this way. But again, he also has a natural propensity towards aggression. So it's just like firemen, right?
Mhm.
You have a lot of them have a fire bug. They
Mhm.
like fire and they love going in, or they have it's like cops. Everyone's wondering like, oh, why are cops beating on people? Because why do you think they became cops?
Mhm.
I train with a lot of law enforcement. I'm a shooter, so I
Mhm.
train with a lot of law enforcement. They're ramped up. These people, they're ramped up on a normal day.
Mhm.
So I'm not defending them. I don't like what a lot of them, how a lot of them act, a lot of them do. But man,
Mhm.
I totally see it, and I totally agree that there's got to be a lot of psychotherapy for professionals. Even it goes even us. Why do we care too much about people we don't know? And
Mhm.
it makes us very toxic because we care so much that there are many times we'll care for our patient more than we'll care for our family. My wife
Mhm.
told me that that was the greatest family decision I've ever made to leave medicine. And I
Hmm.
said, why? I'm like, I spent 20 years training for it. And she was like, well, you weren't a good father. You weren't a good husband because you were taking, all that stress home and you did it for so long, right? You didn't know how to act around your kids and all that. And you're very aggressive with your children because medicine's very aggressive, like do or die, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You have to think on your feet, especially.
yeah, and you're always tense and stressed out. Even to this
Right.
day, my wife, for little things, my wife was like, why are you so stressed out? Because I'm seeing it clinically, or I'm seeing it like I would in the ward. And she would always remind me like, oh, you're not a Marine anymore, you're not
Mhm.
a doctor anymore. And she doesn't mean it like an insult. She means it like you got to tone it down. you're not
Okay.
you're not in the ward, you're not in the war zone anymore. And then
Mhm.
and I forget, and it's sad.
Mhm.
Just imagine goes other people who've been in service a lot longer and had that training a lot longer, and not only people in the military but people in stressful situations like medical personnel. The
Mhm.
one thing the media doesn't want to talk about right now is how many doctors and nurses are quitting. There's a reason why a lot of the hospitals are being overrun. The staff is way overworked and they're done.
So would this also come into like when you're talking about the armed forces, is this also with like the whole PTSD thing because they're trained for
Yeah,
certain things, so they're stuck in that stressful situation?
think about it. They grab you up. They grabbed me up when I was 17. What do you know
Mhm.
when you're 17? They take away your identity. They shave your head. You're no
Mhm.
longer Nelson. You're the cheese.
Mhm.
And I was known for that for 4 years. No one, I
Mhm.
don't think anyone called me my name. Or I had a really funny semi-racist sergeant who called me Garcia all day. And I'm like, sir, it's Garias. He goes, yeah, 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 sure. Garcia, let me tell you. And I'm like, man, every freaking day, man. But you,
Patrick,
but you know what? You get used to it, and then when you go home, you can't turn
you
it off,
can't.
and it's very
Right.
hard to. I used to think that I was one of these people who who adjusted well, until a year ago, a friend of mine put a video of the week of when I came home. There was a party, and I was acting so wrong. And then I asked him to take it down because my wife saw it and said, "Oh my God, what's wrong with you?" Number one, it was at a children's party. It was obvious I was drinking, and I was being very aggressive. And I kind of pushed my girlfriend at the time in front of her.
Oh.
And I was like, "Oh!" And my wife, I don't remember it that way, but my wife
Mhm.
looked at me and goes, "Oh, if you did that to me, I would have killed you." And then my girlfriend at the time took it. Went, "Oh, he's being silly. He's just showing off." And I was like, "Oh my God," because it's wrong.
Mhm.
But you can see now how chemistry can also affect what? Affect
You're-
behavior. Actually, my
Mhm.
mother and I, my mother's a neuropsychiatrist. We, because I'm begging her to continue on this paper that she wrote. We want to make a book out of it on how a lot of these people who do these horrific acts,
Mhm.
we have to look in it. There's minor alcoholism or minor drug abuse somewhere in the history.
Horrific acts is in like, you know, these
Killing
like Ted
kids,
Bundy.
you know, like that officer who killed that guy. I bet you
Okay.
he has some substance abuse somewhere
Mhm.
down the line, because
Well, they said, yeah,
normal
I mean,
people don't act
it,
like that.
yeah, no, they said he was dealing with a substance abuse
Yeah.
issue from what I
We're not surprised. The second my mother and I got the news, we didn't even watch the video. My mom goes, "I bet you he was high." And I worked in New York City EMS for 2 years. How many
Right.
times did I get into fights with cops because they were being irrational? And then your clinical eye looks at it and you're like, "Are you drinking?" And then the cop laid into me and I'm like, "Uh-oh." Right? But
Mm.
again, there's always good people in this world, there's bad people in the world. How many times I bumped into doctors? I'm like, "Doctor, have you been drinking?" And they're like, "No, no, no." Again, then that substance will now do what?
take
act as,
control.
act as an enzyme, and it will do what? End up to products, and then that will cause what? A greater reaction. But don't you
Mhm.
think we have medication to block it? Let's say, for
Mhm.
example, that one enzyme that loves to convert alcohol, and the substrate is alcohol. I can give the patient a drug, right, disulfiram, that will block this. And
Mhm.
the neat part about disulfiram, if they put any alcohol to their lips, they start vomiting. So it's neat.
Mhm.
And so now it hasn't, because people who drink and do drugs, they do it not because they're weak people. They do it because it requires a reaction to make me feel better to deal with what I'm dealing with. And if now the alcohol has an adverse reaction immediately, then that should at least uh, semi curb your patient. But
Mhm.
of course I'm digressing, but this is the basis of all pharmacology right here, this
Mhm.
lock and key fit. Now,
Mhm.
pH, what's pH? And that's the other thing that that was on our list of stuff we need to know. Now, pH, this is what pH actually means. It means the negative log of, and if anything's in brackets, it means the negative log of the concentration of the hydrogen ion. And remember that ions are highly reactive. So your pH scale goes from 0 to 14 or 1 to 14, okay? Because I don't know anything that has like really a pH of 0. Gastric hydrochloric acid has a pH of like, last time I recall, is like 0.8, 0.7. But on the scale of things, neutral, which is where a human being should be, around 7.2, 7.4, is water, right? It's in the middle.
Mhm.
And remember what I told you about imbalance?
Mhm.
Your body could go either
Uh,
way,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So, Miss Jordan, you had a question?
No, I'm following you and just listening.
Okay, so you're in a balance, right? Now, sometimes your blood and your body goes this way, has a little bit more hydrogen ion. So that's what this formula really means. So if it's closer to 1, that means you have a lot of hydrogen ions. If you have a lot of hydrogen ions, that means you are acidic. So increasingly acidic if you head towards this. And you know, if you put milk in your eye, does it hurt? Does it react? No, it's pH.
No.
No big deal. Yeah, I put
So,
bananas and tomatoes in my eye, maybe a little bit, but I put lemon juice in my eye,
Oh
that's
yeah.
gonna hurt. Vinegar in my eye, yeah, that's gonna
Yeah.
hurt. Oh, definitely. What's going to be really reactive is gastric juice or hydrochloric acid. And it's going to start eating up your skin, eating up your face, and all that because it's what? A lot of hydrogen ion. It's highly reactive. Now, let's look at the other side. The other side, the closer we get to 14, the other ion is OH minus or hydroxide ion, but it's the same exact thing. The closer you get to oven cleaner and ammonia, anyone ever get this in their nose? Any of this stuff?
Yeah.
It's really toxic. When I was a kid, I was one of these stupid kids. My mother taught me how to clean the oven. And of course, this is the 70s, so you can't really call my mom on CPS on that. It was the 70s, and I was like, what, 7, 8? And my mother told me exactly what to do. Spray the oven cleaner, open all the windows, use gloves, and then leave the house, go play. But instead, what did I do? I
left the windows open. You left the windows closed. Yeah.
And I sprayed the oven cleaner, and then I don't know why I wanted to read my comic book, and I wanted to read it in the kitchen. Well, hours later, my sister and my mother found me passed out on the floor because the hydroxide got in my lungs, and it shut down everything because it was highly reactive. I had to go to the hospital. Oh, when I was a medical assistant, please do not mix bleach and ammonia. I did that once. When I was a medical assistant.
Not a good idea.
Because we lost a day and a half of patients because the toxic fumes now did what? They bind to your lungs, they bind to your brain, and they cause all sorts of damage, right? So you can see on this spectrum, too much hydroxide ion, OH minus, not good. Too much hydrogen ion, not good. But guess what? You want to see some Illuminati stuff? What's H plus OH minus? Makes H2O, water.
Oh,
right?
water.
So that means we are in balance because human beings are what? 66% water. So we have to have a balance of all of our ions, H plus and OH minus. And when we're here, when we start straying, what does our body want to do? It pushes us back to normal. If you're here, we can give you medication to do what? Push you back to normal. And that's all we do. When you're out of whack, you go off of middle or off of homeostasis. What do we do as medical professionals? We don't heal you. We're not magicians. We're not wizards. I just know science. You know science. And what are we going to do? Push you towards the middle. That's all we do. But what's magic? It's science that you don't know. So when you take meds, you're like, oh, wow, that was awesome. But now you know there's a reason for it. Now, what are your body has these natural things, these natural chemicals inside you called buffers. Now, what's a buffer? A buffer is a weak acid or a weak base. And here, this is basic, which is the opposite of acid. So oven cleaner is very basic. Ammonia, very basic. Gastric juice, which is composed of hydrochloric acid and other things, is very acidic, right? So when your body gets a little bit acidic, there's buffers. And remember we mentioned bicarbonate? Bicarbonate, right, is an HCO3 minus, right, which is part of an OH minus. So if I'm a little bit acidic right here, let's say I have a pH of 5, what will I do? Can I give my patient some bicarb and push it in the line? And what will it do? It'll come back to middle, and that's what we want. How about if my patient's a little bit basic? There's too much, right? Maybe they're pH 8, pH 9. That's not good, right? So maybe you guys heard of this solution called Ringer's Lactate.
No.
Lactate stands for lactic acid, which is a mild acid. So I give you Ringer's Lactate, and what will happen?
It'll bring you back to the middle.
Now you can see a little bit of clinical on what we do to play with your chemistry, and that's all we do all day when we play with your chemistry, right? We are always trying to do what? Use buffers to bring you back to neutral pH, right? And we're just nudging it. And so now you have a much better understanding and a clearer understanding on what we do as clinicians. We're not magicians, we're not, um, like a lot of people think it's magic what we do. It isn't. It's science, and we understand it, and we know how it works. Now, the last thing, well, next to last thing, because we got to talk about water. The next thing we got to talk about is the organic compounds. What are they? And we mentioned them. They're the carbohydrates, right here in the notes, proteins, and fats. And the fourth one is nucleic acids, which we'll be talking about in week 4, which is DNA and RNA. And the DNA is the blueprint of who you are. So these organic compounds are really important because it is who you are. And essentially, they're made out of 4 things: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Now, in carbohydrates, there's only 3: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And they call it carbohydrates because C, carbon, and hydrate, when you hydrate yourself, it's water. So it's composed of a carbon and water, H2O. And carbohydrates are what you now know as your sugars. So we have monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides. What it really means is that we have some basic sugars, and sometimes they're formed into like Lego or building blocks, and sometimes they're only made up of one kind of sugar, so that's a monosaccharide. 2 kinds of sugars, right? Disaccharide. Multiple sugars, some mixture of sugars, that's oligosaccharide, and a whole bunch of sugars, polysaccharide. So that's like the easiest way to look at it. And glucose and fructose, ribose and deoxyribose, especially this glucose and fructose, those are monosaccharides. They're the least complex. And the least complex, that means it's what your body needs the most. And everything that you eat, right, will break down the glucose. And fructose is fruit sugars, and that's why we're always promoting, eating fruits and vegetables, because the fructose is easily broken down into glucose.
Mm-hmm.
So you could see how, like, dieting now makes sense. Like, now several reasons why the doctor keeps on saying, "Oh, eat this, eat your greens, eat leafy vegetables." Now we know that because of enzymes, right? Now you know why the doctor is now telling you eat more fruits, because this can easily be broken down to this. So eating let's say you eat 300 calories worth, like 200 400 calories worth in a fruit bowl. That should go right through you much, much quicker than what else costs 400 calories? Medium fries. Right? But we love salt, we love fat. Actually, when we do our dissections, and when we talk about in anatomy and physiology 2, we'll talk about special senses. One of the senses in your tongue that laypersons usually don't know about, you have something called a glucostat and a lipostat. Because your tongue actually looks for sugar and looks for fat. That's why when I love Doritos, and when they introduced that, calorie baked Doritos, my wife goes, "Here, taste this. This is going to be awesome." I taste it. I'm like, "Oh, what is this?" And she goes, "It's Doritos." And I'm like, "No, it isn't. This tastes like crap." Because what's missing? The glucose, the sugar, and the fat. When you go to a restaurant, ask Chef Nori Hathaway, the head of our culinary department. She'll be the first one to admit it. She goes, the 2 main ingredients of every dish that makes you keep on coming back to any restaurant is fat and salt. Because your body's looking for it and your body likes it, right? That's why when you ever notice at a restaurant, like, you make mac and cheese, it tastes good, but they make mac and cheese, you're like, what the hell's in it, right? Until I do what? I do the same thing. I load it up with Crisco and fat and God knows what, right? And a lot of cheeses and stuff. Oh, it tastes just as good, right? Now, proteins are made up of smaller groups called amino acids. And all amino acids are made up of a carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and a nitrogen. And that's why sometimes you'll see the slang in the lab or in the hospital. We call protein CHON, CHON, or they write it like CHON. That means it's a protein. And all a protein is a carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen formed in these little building blocks called amino acids. and the amino acids are in a specific order so that the protein can do a specific function. That's all. You have essential and natural ones that you need. And that's why these people who are like super vegan, we don't need proteins. Yes, you do. You need some, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be animal protein, but you need a decent amount of protein. A friend of mine, he just got into veganism because of his wife, right? So that, you know, as a husband, you know, if your
Oof.
wife, you have to be into it, right? And he's a meatitarian like me, so I sneak him, you know, I sneak him like some stuff every once in a while because he's like in prison. So he the first 6 months when and his wife was like, I'm feeling great, I don't know what's happened to my to your man Christian, maybe he should go to the doctor. And I go, he was eating protein all day every day for 32 years of his life, and now you got him on nothing, no protein,
Ah,
and he got sick because guess what makes all your antibodies?
proteins. Yeah.
So but it has to be a balance.
You
And
definitely need meat, man. Like you
well,
need
that's the
meat.
meat.
I can't live without
You need
like meat.
protein byproduct. You need some protein. Like
Yeah.
he's got to eat way more tofu. He's got to eat way more bean curd and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm a meatitarian. I'd rather just have my steak, right?
Same.
Try
Yeah.
to chop off the fat as
Me
much.
too.
But you know, again, it goes if your patient is into that, because you guys know vegans, right? They'll be the first one to tell you they're vegan. Right?
Mhm.
Uh,
I love my boy Chris. Me and him have been friends for 6 years now, and I love his wife Olga, but man, she's getting on my last nerve every time we go eat something. She's like, "You're gonna eat that? You know where that's been?" And I go, "Yeah, it's been on my plate. Now it's gonna be in my mouth." And then
Sounds like she needs to talk to my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law is vegan and she actually helps us out with even meat substitutes. But my brother, she'll incorporate some meat meals and stuff for him and then set up her own stuff. So she's not like a hovering kind of vegan. She's not like, pick apart type of person.
she's one of the annoying vegans. Like, what did you eat today? And I'm like, Olga, shut up, man. And they go, you don't want to know what I eat. And I make fun of her and stuff like, hey, Olga, you want to go hunting? Because I'm a shooter. So how do you think I became a shooter? I grew up in a family of hunters. So
Mm-hmm.
I go hunting. And I'm a city boy. I hate hunting. It's like the worst. I just want to go to the grocery and just get whatever I want to get.
Same.
But hey, it goes, you can't choose your parents. So
Nope.
you can see how it has to be a balance, and especially people who get into diets. Like remember the beginning of the Atkins 1 says almost no lipids. What?
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna get really sick because
Mm-hmm.
because it has to be a balance. And again,
Mm-hmm.
if you're dieting, what can you do? You can lower your lipids and
Mm-hmm.
get away from things like the saturated fatty acids. Those are the
Mm-hmm.
things that have covalent bonds. They're solid
Mm-hmm.
at temperature, and those are the things that's going to make you sick, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can use things like in my house, my wife is semi-healthy, and she's a healthcare professional, but she's also like she's a Zumba instructor, and we had a Zumba company that farmed out dancers to all the gyms, and she managed that for 6 years, and we don't cook with vegetable oil anymore. It's like safflower now, oil, and
Mm-hmm.
we use far less than what we used to because I'm hypertensive. She's not. She's not getting any younger, even though she's crazy healthy. She wants to stay that way, and
Mm-hmm.
the sacrifices that need to be made, especially when you get older. I was one of those kids. Like if I needed to lose weight when I was younger, I just not eat for a good day or two, and
Mm-hmm.
my weight would just drop immediately. But
Mm-hmm.
now I'm older. My goodness, I just think about food. And never I thought in a million years would I be battling to try to get to 200 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're older, what happens to the cycle that we just showed? The
It slows down.
It's just so low down. Yeah.
everything's going to get slower, so you have to now
Mm-hmm.
adjust, and that's the reason why we have geriatrics. And last but not
Mm-hmm.
least, of course, the nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. I want you to think of RNA as kind of like a go-between, a messenger, and the
Mm-hmm.
DNA is the blueprint. So there's a blueprint of who you are, and yes, of who you are, everything. And now science has now concluded that 48% of this DNA is your behavior. So yes, because if your parents had tendencies towards alcoholism, substance abuse, what are the odds that you're going to have some tendencies? They're pretty darn good. Now we have evidence. So what must you do growing up? You gotta keep away from it, and you gotta keep away from those issues. I have very positive heart disease in my family and diabetes. So what have I been doing all my life? Avoiding those two things.
Right.
And because every Gorias male has had a heart attack at around the age 30, 35. I'm talking
Wow.
everyone. Guess who's the only one who didn't have a heart attack?
You.
Because I pay attention. I'm like,
Mhm.
and also,
Good.
I hate running. Even now with all this joint pain, I still jog. I still try to swim. Even with all this extra weight, I'm still forcing myself to do things because my heart needs to. Remember, I mentioned I'm in a sedentary lifestyle. I sit around all day. So I'm forcing myself to stand, to move around, and to go up and down the stairs regularly because I know the history and the DNA is there. So same thing with hypertension. That's why I'm always promoting to African American patients, whether male or female, especially male. I don't care how good you are in the gym, how thin you are. You have a propensity towards a ridiculous amount of hypertension. I have a very good friend, Michael. Me and Mike, when I was in shape, we were gym buddies. And for a 50-year-old man, he is cut up. He's got the 8-pack. You know what?
Wow.
Whoa.
He has hypertension, severe hypertension, the kind of hypertension where he got into an auto accident a couple of months ago because he blacked out because his hypertension, he was 200 over 110. Hypertension was so bad that he blacked out.
Wow.
Now I'm like, Mike, my God, you got kids. You gotta, and he was like, oh, I go to the gym every day. That's only part of the equation. Like
Right.
you
I
mentioned
mean,
earlier,
like it.
you have to diet and you have to
Mhm.
watch the salt. And
That
he loves the salt.
yeah, that just goes to show you it doesn't matter how healthy you are if you don't watch, like, family history and
The number.
other factors, that there could be a potential problem.
Yeah, you don't watch the numbers, there's going to be a problem. Now, we
Right.
went over macromolecules, the bonds, the chemical structures. Now, Lee goes, let's wrap it all up and let's talk about water. So, water. Now, we know what water is made up of: hydrogen, 2 of them, and an oxygen. And it forms covalent bonds, and it has solubility. You know that if I put, like, why am I always using Lego as a, how about this, a rock? I used Lego twice already as an analogy. If I put a rock in water, it is not insoluble, right? Look at the water. There's water and there's a rock. But if I put in Kool-Aid in water, then it becomes soluble. You can't.
Right.
That's how you know something soluble is when you mix it up. You can't separate it by normal means. So now, water is a solvent. Another example of a solvent is alcohol, right? And the solute is anything that you put in there to mix, and that's what solubility is. And that's if water is the solvent, that particular drug or whatever is stated to be aqueous, right? So there are drugs that are aqueous. There are drugs that are lipid soluble. There are drugs that are alcohol soluble. So when you're in pharmacology, you got to pay attention to that because, especially with the lipid soluble drugs, it's the reason why me as a former internist, I get very scared of surgery because the gas halothane that we use to put you under is very fat soluble. So that gas will hide in the fat. And if you're a bigger person, right, such as yourself, what will happen? You'll have a hard time coming out of your surgery because let's say let's say a normal person, I put in 3 liters of gas. Me, out of that 3 liters, you might have to use more because more of it will be hiding in my fat, and then it will take a longer time for that stuff to leave my system because I have way more fat than another patient. So that's something, and that's called saturation, and that's something that you have to be cognizant of what kind of solute are you using, which is the powdered, right? And what kind of solvent you were using, which is the water or water part. Now it could be water, a solvent could be water, it could be fat, or it could be alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the cool thing about water is this. Now this is hydrogen and this is oxygen, right? Now
Mm-hmm.
water, and it's the reason why, you know, you put water on your table. It's also one of the reasons why it beads up, you know, like it forms little bubbles and it beads up, right? Because it has, and this delta means partial pressure. There's a partial positive on the hydrogen side, and there's a partial negative on on the oxygen side. So the water kind of lines up that way, right? And and that's why you get surface tension and adhesion, right? Because you know there's things that will cling to the water at times, and it forms these little hydrogen bonds like a little net. Now, remember I mentioned earlier about Kool-Aid and about
Mm-hmm.
salt? Like, for example, salt is sodium chloride. It's held together by an ionic bond. It's pretty strong. Right? You can take salt, you could try to cut it with a knife, but you'll end up with what? Salt. As many
Mm-hmm.
times as you cut it with a knife, it's still sodium chloride. But if I put it in water, what happens? Right? The sodium, which is positive, is going to start getting attracted to the partial negative, to
Mm-hmm.
oxygen. And the chloride, which is negative, is going to start getting attracted to the partial positive. So what does it do? It then pulls the sodium chloride apart. That's why when you mix salt and water, right, which is called a saline solution, which, by the way, you as a human being is made up of 0.9% salt solution. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe you guys heard of it. That's called NSF. That's why I don't. That's why I don't put normal water through you. You're gonna get diluted out if I just put normal water. But if you're dehydrated, what do? I put a line in your arm and then do what? Put NSS, which is 0.9% sodium chloride, right? So that's what's so important about the water molecule. We can now put things in it, right? And it won't disappear. It will be soluble in it. And since it's 66% water, don't you think I could put drugs and other things in there? Then I could put it in a line, like Ringer's lactate, right? That's water soluble. Like that sodium bicarb, that's water soluble. And I could put it in your blood, which is has a decent amount of water in it, and it'll get to go where it needs to go. And that's the beauty, it goes, of water and how we use water. So the notes here are bad, this one here, so don't worry about it because I have extra notes. But the notes here for number 3 is good, and the student guide for water has that nice picture, and so that you can work on your concept maps. And let's look at the discussion for the week so I can give you a hint. Clicking on that. I should click up here. Let's look at discussion 2, and let's give you a little bit of a hint. So based on completion of the case study, complete the application question on Alzheimer's disease. And I think it's, well, how's this? I remember it's either in, let me see, if it's either in, you click on course introduction, and you go to the bottom of it, it says important documents. There might be a study here, lab guide, contract, some stuff, rubrics. Nope, it's not in here. I forgot where it was. It was someplace weird. Might be in lesson. But if you don't see it, just do a case study or find a case study on Alzheimer's and then relate it to chemistry. What is the chemistry of Alzheimer's? And a hint for you guys, since you came to my lecture, look into the fibrillary tangles. Alzheimer's, it goes, interrupts your brain in a physical manner. It's and it has a lot to do with the chemistry. And so look at that and look through that. And let me see if I can find a case. Maybe it's in the lesson 2. But if not, look up your own case if it's not in there. Now, lab don't need to do. Bonding's properties of water lab, there's more notes in there. But of course, the lesson is always the lesson. You click on this, right? You download the case.
Yeah.
And where's the case?
It should be in a PowerPoint. It just looked like a PowerPoint discussion.
Yeah, which this PowerPoint is neat because it has some of the stuff
It has
that
a lot of definitions, which really helps.
yeah, well, a lot of stuff that I was talking about, but there
Mhm.
are some questions in there. You know, you can like this, just answer them and just so I know that you read through it, and then you could see a little bit more visual representation. So these CQ
Mhm.
questions, just answer them, put them on a Microsoft Word document, and
Mhm.
that would be that. And I believe if I could look further, I believe, yep, the Alzheimer's case is here.
Okay.
Okay. All
Okay.
right.
Question 11, though, if you go up to slide 43, that's just filling in the definition, right?
Yeah, that's easy peasy. Yeah,
Okay, just making sure.
that's actually you can even just copy and paste the picture that I got. I kind of gave it to you. The picture that I got in my notes.
Okay.
A description of the bond, an example. And again,
Okay.
you could also Google as well, or go through this. When you go through this, what I
Mhm.
like doing is knowing my questions first, and I put them
Mhm.
aside, and then
Yeah.
when I go to a PowerPoint or when I go through a lesson, uh,
Yes.
I can answer them. But it's pretty straightforward for this week.
Mhm.
All right,
Okay.
ladies.
So just real quick question about the Alzheimer's thing. So you just want us to look up a simple case study and put it to.
Well, use that case study or use like Alzheimer's in general and
Mhm.
relate and write a little ditty, 200 words or a little bit more, just in a little ditty of what does Alzheimer's, the disease, and the pathophysiology of the disease, what does that have to do with all these bonds and chemistry, right? And the hint that I'm give you is the microfibrillary tangles. There are these little like straw-like things that get into your brain because of Alzheimer's, and that's
Mhm.
what screws up with your memory and screws up with a whole bunch of other things. And
Mhm.
that's one of the now not mysteries of Alzheimer's. It's one of the ways that we're trying to tackle Alzheimer's now. Like
Mhm.
if we can get a drug that decreases or slows down these tangles, then
Mhm.
you can slow down the progression. Because remember, Alzheimer's is a progressive disease. You will not get
Right, like dementia.
yeah
I have a question, doctor.
progress. Yes, Miss
So,
Jordan.
can you see the camera right now? I turn on my camera. So when I go to a case study and I
Hold up.
click the link,
Let me look at the camera because I can't.
okay.
Mm,
So can you see my?
why isn't it not showing any of your cameras?
Anyways, when I go to the link for the application assignment for case study,
Mhm.
it say I cannot open it. Like I don't know why. So I'm trying to show you that.
Oh, okay.
Like this website might be impersonating
Yeah,
something like that. I
yeah. Let me.
cannot.
How's this? Shoot me an email, and I'll send you a separate link that's separate, and we'll see if that works. Because
Okay.
that happens every once in a while as well.
Yeah, it's not working for me.
It goes and
Well,
or worst comes to
another
worst,
another question. We
I'll
don't.
just send you the PowerPoint directly. You know,
Yeah.
I can do that too.
So
All
we
right.
don't have to complete the bonding properties of water, right? The
No, no,
lab. We
no, no.
don't.
Don't look at it. Don't like I
Okay.
said. Don't.
Okay. Just want to make
Yeah, I had
sure.
a couple people like because they can't be on our Zoom. A couple of people are like, oh, let me just do the assignments. They're handing in labs that you don't have to hand in. I'll give you
Yeah.
credit for it, but if you don't have to do it, don't do it. That's why I always suggest watch my videos first before you
Mhm.
start doing stuff. Like let's say you missed the Zoom session, watch the video first because it'll save you grief. But I'll give you credit where credit's due. If you did the wrong thing, hey, it's work is work, right? As long
Right. Are you going to
as
send us a copy of this discussion to make sure I'm not, forgetting any information?
yeah, what I'll do since that PowerPoint link is giving some of you trouble, I'll just post the PowerPoint, the actual PowerPoint.
Mhm.
Uh, that'll be easier for you guys.
Okay.
All righty.
Okay.
All
Perfect.
right.
Thank you.
Ladies,
Thank
have
you.
fun and watch out for this recording if you wanna, because everything's so cool right now, right? But then you go to work, you do something, and then on Friday you look at stuff and you're like, oh, what does this mean? Right?
Yeah, yeah. If we can get a copy of this recording we're doing now, that'd be great. Because sometimes I do forget information.
Yep, it'll be in announcements.
Perfect. Thank you so much,
All
doctor.
right, ladies, have a good one.
All right. You
too.
too.
Thank
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Where is my